Before the main part of the podcast, I would like to give a little shout out to the University of Hertfordshire, who are doing a doctoral study on something that is often overlooked in academia. They're conducting research into the experiences of parents or carers who help to look after a child or children where the family has a parent that has mental health difficulties. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful, but what they're looking for are people that are supporting a family where the parent or a parent has a mental health condition and you're supporting their child within the family. And this study is aiming to learn more about the experiences of parents and carers who look after a child or children in the family where the parent has a mental health difficulty. So, for example, this is if someone has a parent that has been living with bipolar or any other kind of mental health issue. So in this situation, what they're looking for are people such as the partner of the parent who is suffering from a mental health issue, the grandparents, older siblings, aunts and uncles, and so that's anyone that is really providing support to the child who is living with a parent that has a mental health issue. And these people will be often providing emotional support for the child. They may also help out with household chores and so forth. And these people are really important to the family and supporting the family generally. However, there's been a lack of research done on this area. So the guys at the University of Hertfordshire are looking for people who are looking after a child or children aged 4 to 17 with a parent that has a mental health difficulty. So this could be officially diagnosed or it could not be. So it doesn't really matter if it's diagnosed or not. Participants are expected or should be willing to take part in an interview with the researcher to talk about your experiences. And what will happen is that it will go into the larger study for the researchers to find out more about how your support is impacting the family and yourself. If you are willing to help out in this research, you will be asked to take part in an hour-long interview, and this interview and its location is generally flexible depending on your individual needs. And if you are nowhere near Hertfordshire, they can do the interview via Skype with you. So if there's anyone out there that's listening to this podcast and you think that you fit this criteria and you would like to find out more about how you can get involved with this research, all you need to do is send an email to r.bishop@hearts.ac.uk, or you can tweet at BeccaJBG. I will put all of this in the show notes for you so that if you are interested and would like to participate, you can easily find the information. I think that this piece of research will be invaluable to those that are looking after or helping out a family who has mental health issues ongoing. And you telling them your own personal experiences can help with them supporting other people who find themselves in the situation as well as yourself. So that was just a little bit of a shout out to this research study being conducted at the University of Hertfordshire by Becca. So good luck, Becca, in your recruitment of participants. Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to this week's episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence. Today we are looking at A Bitter Pill to Swallow by Tiffany Gholar. Goodreads gives it a 3.92 stars and Amazon 5 stars, although that's only one review. I gave it 3 stars and Sydney gave it 4 stars. The book is also the winner of the 2016 Chicago Writers Association Book of the Year Award for fiction non-traditionally published. And the blurb says, on the edge of the Chicago Medical District, the Harrison School for Exceptional Youth looks like a castle in a snow globe. Janina has been there since she was 10 years old and she's now 14. She feels so safe inside its walls that she's afraid to leave. Devontae's parents bring him there after a tragedy leaves him depressed and suicidal. Even though he's in a different place, he can't escape the memories that come flooding back when he least expects them. Dr. Gail Thomas comes to work there after quitting her medical residency. Frustrated and on the verge of giving up on her dream, she sees becoming a counsellor as one of her last chances to put her skills to the test. When he founded the school, Dr. Lutkin designed its unique environment to be a place that would change the students' lives. He worked hard as the keeper of other people's secrets, though he never shared any of his own. But everything changes late in the winter of 1994, when those 4 characters' lives intersect in an unexpected way. None of them will ever be the same.
I have to admit that I think that out of all of the books that we've read so far, that this might be the most difficult to talk about because there are so many different characters. And although they kind of overlap with each other, there are specific journeys that each of the characters take. So I thought we would start off by discussing Devante and his journey, and also Janina at the same time. So those are the 2 teenage characters within the book. And then we'll go into Dr. Lutkin, particularly because I found his story rather interesting. So with him, he has his own mental health issues in the past, and as a result has later on changed his name so that people don't necessarily remember it was him. And he's written about it from he states that it's his brother, but actually it's really him. And I think that's quite an interesting topic to explore a bit further.
Definitely.
But I think we'll start off with Devante and what has brought him to the Harrison School, intermixed with a bit of Janina and how they interact with each other, and then about Janina and her story. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it will make sense when we start talking about it a bit more.
But just remember, there are lots of other characters as we go through. So when you read the book, you'll see there's a lot of other stories, a lot of other things we could have talked about. But we wanted to limit it so it didn't take hours and hours, and also so that you can see the main stories.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to start off with Devante, and he is diagnosed at the Harrison School with acute stress disorder. And his story of getting to the Harrison School is very tragic.
Yeah, I felt really sorry for Devante. He's a 15-year-old African-American boy whose life is completely turned upside down when Monica, the girl he is in love with, is killed by a gang targeting a person who wore similar clothes to him. He wanted to surprise her. It's Valentine's Day. He'd bought her some gifts. He'd plucked up the courage enough to ask her to be his girlfriend. But as he goes towards her house, that's when the mistaken identity happens. Shots are fired towards him. However, they don't hit him, and she dies of those bullets. The cops say to him that he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It's not really any consolation, is it, to be honest?
No, but he sees that as he should have never gone, and then that's where his guilt starts to grow. And I think it is his mental health illness comes out of the guilt of this particular...
Because he blames himself.
Yeah.
It's this overwhelming sense that it's because of him that Monica is dead.
Yeah.
And you can see where that comes from. It's not like if anyone else was in that situation, I don't know about you, but I probably would feel exactly the same. I would feel like I caused this accident.
It's like they say they're survivors.
Survivor's guilt. Exactly.
Yeah. It's the survivor's guilt of actually you survived something and someone else didn't. I think especially as this was entwined in, he was the one wearing the clothes that they thought meant that he was in this rival gang. So he feels that he is the one that caused this because he put those clothes on. He went to her house. She literally didn't do anything.
He just opened the door.
Yeah. Even though he didn't actually do anything to cause this to happen, he feels that because he was the cause, be it in the eyes of those rival gang people, that he feels that guilt, and that guilt grows and grows. And you hear about this spiral into depression, where it starts off with him sort of starting to isolate himself. He's reminded her a lot because obviously there's a lot of posters up at school. There's her home. It's in the news. So he can't get away from it. So he stops going to school. He hides in the basement. He doesn't want to worry his mum. We start to find out actually in the last 6 months, he's had quite a tough life. His parents have got divorced. He's had to move home. He's had to start a new school anyway. So all of that,
and then all of a sudden, the girl that he is in love with,
that he's made this connection with, is then tragically killed. So all of that all together spirals him into the depression, which means he also feels he can't talk to his mum or his nan about it because they're already dealing with a lot, going through what's going on. They're already worried about him because they know he's been through this tragic event, but they don't know how to talk to him about it. His mum's upset because obviously she's going through this divorce. So all of that together just means you see this spiral and into the fact that he then ends up on a motorway bridge that goes over the motorway. Yeah. And he is contemplating jumping off of that bridge to end it all. What I thought was really interesting was the way that he talks about it ending because he doesn't want to sleep anymore because it's the sleep that is causing the flashbacks. It's when he sleeps, he gets nightmares. And whereas most people would say it's to go to sleep when that sort of thing happens, he was like, no, I want to end the sleep. And he knows he can't bring Monica back. He knows he can't change what happened. he feels like his only option, the only thing he can change and he has control over, is his own life.
Exactly, and he's in such a big crisis that he sees this as his only way out. It's not like he is taking this light-heartedly. He's thought about it quite a lot. I think it's been 3 weeks since he's properly been to school, and it's all kind of come to a head.
And he's not sleeping, and a lack of sleep is a massive deal with your mental health. I know we should all get 6 to 8 hours a night, and not, very few of us do with our busy life these days. But actually, if you have constant insomnia, it can seriously affect your mental health because you don't process things properly.
You can't deal with the emotions either.
And your brain doesn't have that switch off time to process what is going on in your life. And when his brain is sleeping, it's too busy.
Yeah, it's too busy thinking about what happened to Monica and the blood. And there's so many vivid descriptions about the scene that he keeps remembering. And my heart just goes out to him that he has to constantly relive the same thing over again.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad enough you had to go through that once.
Let alone several times because your brain keeps fixating on it.
Yeah. So luckily there are some police officers when he's up on the bridge. They talk him down. They take him to the police station. He's taken to the hospital and he ends up in this hospital school for children with mental health issues. And I think that's actually one of the best things that could have happened to him because he gets the help he needs.
Exactly. And he also gets to meet people that it shows just how kind and caring and such an empathetic person he is, because not only has he started to deal with his stuff whilst he's at the school, as he starts to come out of his depression and get a bit better, he starts to in some ways help people around him and has this sense of self-worth as a result of helping others around him.
Yeah, I think it also puts his own mental health issues in a perspective. Not to say what he was dealing with was any less difficult or hard, but his is a short-term mental health illness. It can progress to a long-term thing. Luckily, we don't see that here, but it can do. And whereas he then looks around and sees there are children younger than him who are dealing with mental health issues. There are children that have been there for years. Janine, who we're going to talk about as well, who has been there for 4 years, and he can't understand why they're there. He can't understand, thinks that dealing with what he dealt with at the age of 15 must be tough. But then he looks around and says, well, what if I was 5? And I think that's a really poignant moment for him where he starts to sort of almost, it puts a perspective on what he is dealing with, which is difficult to get when you're dealing with a mental health illness.
Yes. And I think in some ways, though, particularly for certain other mental health issues, I believe the term is called comparing and contrasting, that sometimes that can be a hindrance, but for Devante, that is actually quite a benefit because he goes, yes, okay, this horrible thing has happened and I can't change it and someone is dead, but there are also others out there that are suffering even worse than he is.
Yeah.
And for him, he doesn't then downplay what has gone on. He owns what has happened.
Yeah.
But he also gets this sense of, well, there are other people around me that are in a worse position.
Yeah.
And at this point, maybe I can help. Maybe I can do something for them. So we get to meet a girl called Janina. She is 14 and she's been at the Harrison School, as Becky said, for 4 years. And she was essentially, I think, kicked out of her school because she was not following their rules.
She wasn't conforming. It sounds like it was quite a strict religious school as well. And she had to conform, but unfortunately, she's a very bright student. So when she would finish something, her classwork, she'd start reading a book. And then she'd get told off for reading that book. She'd want to be artistic and decorate things, but they didn't want her to. They wanted her to follow the rules. And so it sounds like it was a very strict upbringing. And
because it's the same at home as well. Some of the things that we hear about her school are reflected with her home life as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And I think that is actually, for a child who we see is very artistically gifted, freedom of expression would be very important to her character and her confidence, and that is knocked out of her. And whereas she's diagnosed with depression at age 10, we're going to see that actually maybe it wasn't depression, maybe it was just that she was being suppressed.
Yes.
And that suppression led to a depression that ends up with her in the hospital.
Yeah, because she's so critical of herself. And these are going to be the messages that were drummed into her during school, and the criticism of the way she's behaving and the things that she's doing. She then turns that in on herself. And all through the book, we start to see that Janina is really horrid to herself. I think that's the only way I can really describe it, is that this critical voice that she has inside herself is so busy beating her up all the time that of course she's not going to be able to function, because whatever she does, it's going to be wrong.
Well, it's like when her parents arrive and she's having some fun with the other children, and I think she's dancing with Devonte, and they walk in and she suddenly is like, oh my God, they're going to tell me off. And all she was doing was, it was very innocent. It was just a bit of fun. But she knows her parents are going to criticize her. Boys are not allowed, they're very strict about this. And they criticize her and they have a go at her, when actually it's one of those moments of freedom and moments of expression and moments of happiness. There was no maliciousness. There was no, yes, they're teenagers and they do kind of fancy each other as the book
But there's always supervision.
There's always supervision.
And that's talked about quite a lot, is when Devante goes into her room, it's always with a staff member. So I don't necessarily think anything else could have happened because they're so supervised.
No.
But parents being parents
are overly worried that this dancing might lead to something else. And therefore they then criticize her. And that criticism is what she takes on board herself. And she just doesn't feel she's good enough. She feels that everything she does is wrong. And it makes her feel really worthless, when actually Devonte doesn't understand this. He says that he sees her as this sparkling, amazing person with this, glow to her because of her expressiveness and her artistic ability. And I think that's really interesting, because when Devonte asks her to draw him, and when he looks at the picture, it's not what he sees. And I think that starts him to realise that she doesn't see herself the way she is, and he doesn't see this way that he is. And that almost opens him up to understanding that, and then allowing other people's opinion of himself to start feeding his opinion of his own self. And then eventually he's used that to turn it and show Janine that actually she's actually really amazing. Janina, sorry.
That's all right, I let you off. But I think that's such a common thing. I think if you speak to most people out there, that if you were asked to describe yourself, I think that I would describe you differently to what you would describe yourself as.
Yeah, that's very true. I think when we look in the mirror, we don't see what other people see. We see what we've developed as a person as. I know myself, I look in the mirror and I always, no matter what size I am, I see myself as fat. I don't see myself ever, even when I was skin and bones, didn't see myself as anything but fat. And
we're our own worst critics, aren't we, really? And I think that if you are a person that takes on the criticisms of everyone else around you, that just makes you think that you're in the right, because if everyone else is criticising you, then what you are seeing must be right.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's hard to get around, because how do you break that cycle when the mirror isn't telling you what's right? Your clothes ties might not be telling you what's right, because they're different in every shop anyway. You will believe some people, but there are some people who are always critical with you, so you're more likely to believe their criticisms. So
I definitely believe the criticisms.
It's so true.
More.
I mean, we are. Even when it comes to reviews, one bad review is talked about by 15 people compared to a good review that's read by one and not spread. We are a nation, or humans are naturally more critical, and we believe more. We want to talk about the bad things.
Yes. I have an example of when I was speaking to you via text message, when I asked my husband what he thought of this podcast, and he said, oh, I really liked the book reviews, and I didn't necessarily think I would, because I don't think I'm probably going to ever get to read these books. I automatically took that as, well, he doesn't like any of the other podcasts that I've done in between. So you can see that how he never actually said he didn't like the...
No, he didn't even criticise the other things. He was actually giving you a compliment.
And I couldn't take it as a compliment.
No.
And that, I think, is also when things start to become a problem, is that others around you are so desperately trying to get you to see you for who you are, but yet you discredit and you ignore what they're telling you because you just don't believe it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, as someone who was criticised for a long time as a young person, it does make you feel like you aren't worth anything, that actually others, even when they're not criticising you directly, you will read criticism in everything, as you did. And it goes, that's where it goes that step beyond, and actually is much harder to pull back from, when actually need somebody else to almost go, no, hold on a sec, that's a compliment. That's not a criticism. He's saying he likes those. It's a scale. It's like, these are good and these are really good. It isn't, this is bad and this is good. It's not black and white, there's grey.
But I guess that's an issue with borderline personality, is that everything for me is black and white, and it's very difficult to identify the grey, and I automatically go to the negative.
But I think if the situation was reversed, I think I do the same thing sometimes, and that not because I don't have borderline personality disorder, but I do think that because we were brought up by very critical parents, we are very critical on ourselves, and it goes beyond that. So I see criticism in people saying things, and if someone said to me, oh, I don't know, you look like your mum, I would take that as a criticism, no matter what.
I probably would too.
I hope my mum doesn't listen to this podcast. But, it's just, I do think that we read criticism into more things than there
what
are.
It's intended as well.
And if someone says one bad thing to us, so for example, being a teacher, we do get criticised a lot for our teaching. We're naturally critical people as well, because we're taught we have to teach the kids what went well and even better if. And there's always an even better if. And that makes you always think there is something to improve on.
Like when you text me going, is 70% good on your coursework for your university course? And I'm like, yeah. And you're like, really?
Yeah, because 70% to me doesn't sound like really good. For a GCSE in history, which is what I teach, an A star is 90%, an A is 80%. So a 70, I'm like, oh, well, that's like a B.
And there's still 30% left.
Yeah. But actually, when it comes to masters, apparently that's a distinction.
Yeah, you don't have to worry.
And that's like getting a first at uni.
Yeah, so you should have done a happy dance.
Yeah.
Did you do a happy dance eventually?
Once I realised.
After you were counselled on the fact that actually you've done all right, don't worry about it.
But even then, I still went, I did really well, but I had help and I had this and I had that. When I was seeing my counsellor and she was like, wow, that's amazing. And I was like, yeah, well, I had help from here and I did that. And she was like, no, stop and take it. You did well.
Take it, darling. Take it.
And I do find it really hard to take a compliment and to take, anything that says nice, because I'm so critical of myself.
And I think that's exactly the case that we see for Janina, is that anything that anyone else tells her, she just can't take. And she also has all this anxiety because she is dwelling on past events.
So I think this links really well with Janina's parents, because she is told she has good parents. She believes she's got good parents, and her good parents are the ones that are telling her that she's not good enough. And her teachers are telling her she's not good enough. And her teachers are meant to be, the fonts of knowledge. That's what, we apparently are. And so I think that's where she finds it very hard then to build up a self-confidence in herself, when the people that are telling her that she isn't good enough are the ones
people that
she's
really
told that she's right. And actually, admitting that your parents are not good, that they're not always right, is a really difficult thing for anyone to do, let alone a child who is told by society that they are the ones that are meant to tell you what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad.
Isn't that also a way that we start to grow up as such, that we start to realise that people around us are also have their own issues?
Yeah, I mean, it is a massive stage in a child's life when they realise their parents aren't all perfect, that actually their parents have faults too. And it is a big thing to actually accept, and some children found that harder than others. I know I have found it very difficult to admit that my parents were not great. And
they did the best they could.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think we should say parents all do the best job they can do.
Unless they're really bad parents.
They're all dealing with their own issues and their own set of standards and their things they were taught. So we see this, and we've seen this in other books where we've seen the parents actually dealing with their own things as pass things on to the ones below.
Exactly, and admitting it. Yeah. I think in some of the books that we've read that they've admitted that they have their own issues and they just didn't know how to broach subjects.
Yeah. But I think this is where the key to Janina's sort of recovery comes from, when she realises that her parents were wrong in her diagnosis and her doctors were wrong before, and so were her teachers.
Yeah, so we find out that as a result of Dr. Gail Thomas's in-depth discussion with one of her colleagues, who happens to be an 18-year-old who has gone through medical school and has come out the other end as a psychiatrist, I believe.
Yeah.
You kind of go, wow, he must be extremely smart and able, that he and one of her supervisors have done a research paper about how sometimes mental health issues can be mistaken for a child/person who has such a high intelligence that because of that, they don't necessarily fit into what society expects of them.
Yeah, and I think that definitely rang true with her when it came to Janina's story, that actually it was her lack of conforming and her pushing down sort of her ability to express herself properly that actually causes Janina to go into depression. And that doesn't mean that she didn't have depression age 10 when she was diagnosed with depression.
I think it may have perpetuated it, though.
Yeah, I think it's what it is it's trying to say to her, well, actually, if they had realised what was causing the depression, because it was this pushing her down even though she was so bright, that actually the last 4 years of counselling would have been different. So I think one of the sort of two main things that happen to Janina that starts to change things for her. Firstly, she doesn't listen to lots of different music. Her parents tell her that she should listen to religious things. So she puts on a new tape they've brought in with a new pastor. And pastor actually says, tonight I'm preaching to you all from another text from the New Testament. Tonight I'm going to tell you all about a young man about your age, only 12 years old. And he obeyed his parents. He honoured his parents. But then one day he had to stand up to his parents, and his name was Jesus. And so I think that starts her journey.
Makes you start questioning it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hang on a minute. If Jesus had to stand up to his own parents, then perhaps she needs to do the same thing for herself.
Yeah. And then Gail gives her a book from Dr. Lutkin, which is called Bringing Up Parents, the Teenager's Handbook, with a post-it saying, time to stand up for yourself. And so she sees this as well as sort of like the Lord acting in mysterious ways. He
Because it's at the same time,
yeah,
isn't it?
Brought the new pastor in, gave her a book. So she's reading this book, and she actually is able to then start telling her parents that actually, you hurt me yesterday when you started screaming at me just because I was dancing with a boy. And then when she's criticised by her parents for being emotional, she starts going, well, why can't I be emotional? Why can't I tell you, you have made me angry, you have hurt my feelings, I'm not a little girl anymore. And then, of course, they go, you're always my little girl, sweetie, and all that. And then she has to sort of say, well, no, actually, I am my own self. And she starts to feel that actually she's not defined by what her parents have told her. She's not defined by what they've told her she should be. She's actually starting to realise what she is. And I think that is a really important step.
Yeah, and she's accepting her own self-identity at this point, isn't she? She's like, hang on a minute, I did not like that. I need to tell them.
So she actually comes to a point where she's going to confess her feelings that she's having around Devontae possibly leaving, and that she's going to miss him so much, and she feels like she might be falling in love with him. Dr. Lutkin says, well, you've got to love, before you can love anyone else, you need to learn to love yourself. Very, cliche.
But very true.
Yeah.
Even though it is cliche and everyone goes, oh yeah, they say it like that. But actually, until someone actually identifies that there is good in them, how can you let anyone else in?
Yeah.
So you can kind of see where he's coming from.
True. And so it does mean, though, that she just starts to accept her own feelings, and that actually those feelings are valid. And I think that's a really big step. Knowing that your emotions that you are having, it's okay to have them.
And someone isn't telling you that you're constantly wrong to have those emotions.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think that's a really important step, and where we see progress towards her being able to leave the hospital school as well.
Yeah, so she and Devante, in their quest in some ways to get better, actually managed to leave the school together at the end of the book.
So for Janina, when she starts to realise that the diagnosis was wrong and that she didn't have depression, she might have done at the beginning when she was being suppressed so much that it caused those feelings. But actually, since she'd been at the hospital, she'd been able to express herself. So actually probably had come out of the depression. So, and I think that's quite difficult for her to deal with the fact that they were wrong. She doesn't have what she defined herself as, because she had right from the beginning said, I'm crazy. I'm with the crazies. This is part of my identity. And so to say part of your identity is actually wrong would be really difficult.
Actually, you are really quite normal.
Yeah. You're just really intelligent and people didn't know how to handle it. You'd be like, right. And that's going to cause a lot of resentment, a lot of anger. She's just lost 4 years of her childhood, really.
Although I do think that perhaps the Harrison School was the right place for her after the description. So Dr. Gail Thomas goes out to the school trying to understand if it really is depression or not. And she listens to what the teachers have to say. And you listen, when you read in the book what they say about Janina, you go, actually, the Harrison School, in all fairness, was the best place for her to end up, I think.
But it's going to be that conflict of emotion as actually she was there for the wrong reasons, but it was actually best for her. But at the same time, they got labelling her like that wasn't good. So actually she should have probably been there in a shorter term. But then it's also, how does she then now, she's still only 14, how does she then say to her parents, I don't want to go back to that other school. I now no longer have depression. I didn't have depression for years. You've been treating me like I have. And how do you react to that? And how do you change that? So the whole situation is quite difficult for her to deal with.
She needs to question her own identity, because in some ways something that she classified herself has been taken away. And I don't know, maybe she grieves a little bit over this for a while in the book when we see this confusion.
Yeah. And I think she'll have to go through the fact that, was it wrong, but now it was actually the right place, and actually she wouldn't have met Devontae otherwise. And she does seem to react really well and actually go, you know what, last 4 years are the last 4 years. They've been what they've been. And
don't think I would have, to be honest.
No, she doesn't seem to get angry at it. She seems to sort of go, okay, rather than looking back over the last 4 years, whether that's only because we only see her in the short term after this realisation. Maybe in the long term, those feelings would come out.
That's true.
When she started to realise the things that she could have done in those times, maybe. But anyway, it's what we do see is that actually she seems to deal with it really well. Should we go back to Devontae a bit? I feel like we haven't spoken about the way that he's treated and how he deals with the life in the hospital.
Yeah, so we said at the beginning that he is diagnosed with acute stress disorder, and how that this is usually a short-term mental health issue in comparison to something such as post-traumatic stress. But just because it is a short-term thing doesn't mean it's any less difficult to deal with. Yeah. I mean, we read about the horrific flashbacks that he's getting, the nightmares, the fact that just seeing a teddy bear in Janina's room sets him off into this kind of...
Well, he screams.
Yeah.
He screams and shouts, and he says he can see blood sort of pouring down, raining down, and he has to be taken out and has to be calmed down and put back in his room, and all from a teddy bear, because actually Janina, first of all, thinks that she's done something wrong. But for him, he just sees this one teddy bear and it reminds him of all this stuff. And then he's so scared to go to sleep. He's so scared to close his eyes because he thinks that's all he's going to see is all this blood and this gore and what happened. So to deal with these issues that he's having, he is given sleeping pills to help him go to sleep without the nightmares and the trauma of that. Then he is also submitted to exposure therapy, which is where you are shown pictures of what really happened during the trauma to help you sort of deal with it in a sort of very classified, very steady sense. So first of all, he's shown Monica's house.
Without anything going on, just literally a picture of the front of the house.
And he looks at it, he sees more than what's actually in the picture, finds it hard, and then eventually they show him the pictures from the crime scene. Which is pretty tough. Definitely. I think.
I know he was there, but that's pretty tough going to see.
Yeah, but I think he realises that actually his imagination's made it worse than it was.
That's true.
To see. I'm not saying the experience of it was easier, but I think, there wasn't as much blood as he thought there was. There wasn't as, there wasn't blood raining down, So I do think that it does help him in that sense, and it helps him realise that the experience is the experience and almost kind of put a bracket round it.
Yeah, so kind of, in some ways, to sound again a bit cliche, put some kind of closure on the situation that he has faced. as a result of Monica's death and this tragic unfolding of events, which no one could have predicted. It's not like he could have gone, you know what, again, he talks about hindsight all the time, I shouldn't have gone, I shouldn't have done this. But you can't go back and change things once things have happened.
Yeah.
And I think that also is quite difficult to deal with as people, is that we think about past events and we go, oh, we should have done this, we should have done that, and we should have done something else. But you can't change it. No. So why do we spend all our time worrying about something that's happened?
And actually, what does that mean he would change in the future? It's not like he can learn a lesson from that. Oh, I shouldn't I shouldn't go out and see people. I shouldn't wear the certain clothes. You can't make those rules for yourself. It's not as if you can learn something from that's going to be helpful.
And he probably didn't necessarily know that this other gang member was wearing the same clothes as him.
He didn't know anything about the gangs. He wasn't in any of the gangs. He wasn't part of it. So to him, he is able to sort of step out from it a little bit more. I think then he actually has a visit to the school as well, which he then starts to see the posters of Monica again, but he also sees the tributes that other people have made, and he starts to realise that he wasn't the only one at the school who was upset by this. He wasn't the only one experiencing her loss. And so he turns around and says, this is the first time I can actually see myself getting better from this, because he can see that there are people around him who relate to what he's going through.
Probably not as such an extreme level as what he's been going through, but definitely that they're experiencing the same grief because they all have lost someone.
Yeah. And grief can be, it is horrendous. And especially over time, people think that you're going to get over things. And, I know a friend of mine who lost her brother, and she says it's not like that. You end up carrying it around for the rest of your life. Sometimes it's easier. Some days are harder. It's like carrying a suitcase, or some days a backpack, other days, and a rock the next day. But sometimes it's a satchel. It just depends on how you're feeling each day, but it's always there. And she said it's never not going to be there, because that wouldn't then justify that person's life. I need to remember. I need him to be part of my life. Otherwise,
it's having those memories. Completely. Yeah, exactly. It's having those memories, but without that overwhelming sense of sadness. It's being able to enjoy the fact that there were good times between people.
Yeah, and remembering them for who they were. And I think that's what he starts to get near the end, where he is allowed to think of her without thinking of that event. He is allowed to think of her as the person that he liked, the person he was going to ask out, without having to think of, oh, but she's dead, and oh, but she's dead because of me. And that's that separation of those thoughts.
Yeah, and I think that also the relationship that he and Janina have contributes to him getting better, because there are times when it speaks in the book that he's also worried that something's going to happen to Janina, and that
as if the fact that he loved Monica is what caused her death, and so if he now loves Janina, she's now going to die as well. So he does have those worries, and actually we kind of have to accept that when anyone you meet and interact with could die at any time. It's the one thing that we can guarantee is going to happen in your life. You will die, and unfortunately, I'm sorry about that, but it's going to happen
quicker for some than it does.
Yeah. And we can't predict it. So he has to kind of accept that he's going to learn to love and respect and meet people and like people, and they could disappear from his life.
Perhaps now we should move on to Dr. Lutkin. And I think his story in this book is quite interesting, particularly the fact that he was known by a different name beforehand, and Dr. Gail Thomas finds this out, that he has written a paper, but he says it's his brother's experience of mental health, but actually she realises it is him that has had issues with mental health in the past, and that he was institutionalised as a result of his own mental health.
Yeah, and where he says that he was inspired to become a psychologist because of his brother's story, he was actually so inspired by his own earlier story and not wanting others to go through the same experience.
Particularly with the way that the hospital system was set up and his own personal experiences of being in an institution.
Well, if you think of the history of mental health, it's
not good.
It's not. I mean, the right care isn't there right now. We see this in that this hospital that is based in this book isn't your regular treatment for children in 1994 when this is set. in America, that it's actually more institutionalized than this. And I think that is more the general case across the world. And whereas he talks about going into the past, and if you go back, it must have been at least 10, 15 years before.
So probably early 80s.
Yeah. And in the 70s and 80s, we're still finding new treatments. People are trying the electric shock
therapy, which has its place.
Yes.
And it does help people with their mental health. But
in the past was used for everything and everybody because they didn't know what it was used for best and how it could be good for some people, but actually can make other people worse.
So Dr. Lutkin is running this school when his colleague, he and his colleague set it up, and his colleague retired, and so he is now in charge of the school. And I think it's quite interesting because this school is being used as a placebo, or when they're doing trials and clinical tests to find out whether a new drug works better than just psychotherapy, that they compare the results to the kids at this school. So they're
the control group.
Yeah, essentially. So these kids are the control group that are undergoing just therapy, and they are given pills. However, they're sugar pills, so they're the placebo pills, which might have inspired the name a bitter pill to swallow, because they have put a bitter coating on the outside of the tablet to make everyone think that it actually is actual medication.
Yeah, because medication should taste bad. Is
of
what
course.
we believe, yes.
I don't know about you, but if you've ever accidentally not swallowed sertraline at the same time as drinking water and you popped it in your mouth and you waited for a bit, that is disgusting.
Any tablet, to be honest, isn't great if you don't swallow it properly. So I get that. I do think it is interesting that the placebo group, isn't it? Something that actually probably wouldn't be morally allowed now, ethically.
I think it may be ethically allowed because it's the way that clinical trials work today is that it's not a case of the control group has no treatment. The control group has the best treatment for a particular issue. So the control group will have a treatment, but it will be the next best treatment. So for example, in clinical studies for cancer, if you're testing a new cancer drug, instead of getting the new drug, you'll get the one that is currently used before. So it's not a case of them having nothing. They have something. It's just that will therapy work better or a new drug work better? And what happens in the book is that unfortunately the drug companies are trying to make the school into the institution that Gail has left in her past residency. And so they're trying to make it into a cost-saving, money-making thing.
Well, they don't like the fact that it's actually working, that it's actually showing that these kids actually do better on the placebo and therapy than they do with the drugs. But it's the drug company that's funding everything, so therefore they don't want that to be the case. They want their drugs to be the go-to answer.
And that this particular facility is costing them a lot of money because of the way that it's set up, that people may be there for an extended period of time.
Yeah, but that's because they have very complex issues. And I think we are with the NHS and other medical health organisations around the world are in a very reactionary state. We want to try and give someone a drug for them to get better and then move on. And by get better, that sometimes just means cope with life. And I think in mental health in particular, if you can give somebody the drugs that keeps them at a state where they can live in a house and just do daily living, that seems to be okay. Rather, that's not a cure, that's not better, that is just back to the norm.
Yes, so that's clinical recovery versus personal recovery. So the clinical is that the medical profession deem you to have recovered, in comparison to a personal recovery that means that being able to continue a normal day-to-day life that you have wanted to is a sign of recovery.
Yeah, and that's not always enough.
Not for some people, I don't think. I think for some it's as best as they're going to get, but for others they may want more. So Dr. Lutkin has felt the need to change his name to reduce the stigma associated with his past mental health issues.
Yeah, he feels he can't carry on and become a medical profession without hiding the fact that the reason he wants to do that is because he's gone through his own mental health journey.
That's sad, isn't it?
It is. It's really
sad. It shows the stigma back in the 90s specifically. However, how much has necessarily changed now? I know that there are people out there that would be or have been in treatment for some kind of mental health issue, but how much stigma is still attached to them.
I think there's still a lot. I mean, I know there's a student that in our school that doesn't want us to help with his mental health in any way, because if it goes on his record, it could stop him getting into the RAF, for example, later on, and he wants to be a pilot, and they won't let him do that if he's had mental health issues in the past. And part of me goes, okay, well, do we want people with mental health issues in fighter pilot planes? But
Probably not necessarily, but then I guess it depends what the actual issue is.
If you had a mental health issue as a child, as a teenager, and you dealt with it, or even as a grown-up and you dealt with it, and it is not, rather than a long-term mental health issue, it's actually a short-term one, then why not? And even long-term, I mean, I don't know if I'd actually want someone who is actively schizophrenic flying fighter pilot planes.
Particularly if they're having hallucinations and delusions.
Yeah. However, if they did deal with depression in their teens, and a lot of teenagers do, because the hormones that are running through and the brain development that's going on in your teenage years, then why can't they then, as they grow out of that and they're later on, they get to do that? I mean, you can commit crime as a teenager and still get to do things as a grown-up without that criminal record following you.
Maybe it should be the same with your mental health record.
Maybe. And then again, it depends what mental health it is, like I said, because, the mental health clinics don't want to diagnose, or clinicians, don't want to diagnose mental health serious illnesses until you're above 18 anyway, even 25, because that's when your brain stops developing. So stops, we develop throughout, but most of it is developed by the age of 25. So it is that time when actually they don't like to diagnose before then, because it could just be hormones, it could just be brain development.
So really, should mental health be following people? Maybe there should be some kind of assessment before. Yeah. Like when you get to that point where you are classified as an adult.
And I know as a grown-up, I've had to fill in forms. As a grown-up, I've had to fill in forms for jobs, and it says, they have the occupational health form that comes with it. And being that I have a fibromyalgia chronic pain condition and I have migraines, I usually have to fill these forms in, and it always says, have you suffered with mental health issues currently or in the past? And you have to detail what's going on. And that thought does go through your brain. What if that means I don't get this job?
Can they necessarily discriminate these days against disclosures of mental health? I know that
legally, no.
But I don't know, in your back of your head, would that play on someone's mind who is trying to give you a job?
They're not meant to see that form until after they've decided who to give the job to. It's like age isn't meant to be on your form until after they've decided to give the job to, although
but
when
they might have noticed.
In front of you.
Hi, I'm 65. Not saying that there's anything wrong with being 65. Or, hi, I'm actually 18.
So they're not meant to know those things until after they've decided who to give the job to. So you're meant to answer those, questions before. It's like the form where you fill in what ethnicity you are. They're not meant to know that until, those forms aren't given to them. They're separate forms. But again,
then I guess, how would you necessarily know unless it's documented, or unless they actually actively state to you, oh, by the way, we don't want to employ you now because of your mental health?
But they wouldn't. They'd find another reason. They'd say the other candidates were more qualified, or the other candidate said something in the interview that ticked the right box. They wouldn't say it, but that doesn't mean that it's not the reason they're using. And I think that a lot of people hold stigmas without realising it.
That is true. However, I was quite concerned when I was in Australia, and my husband was given a licence for a gun, and it was in my house, and me with borderline personality disorder.
Yeah.
I must admit, that
worries me.
Yeah. Well, it worried me, which is why I told him to not show me where the key was and stuff, because even though I didn't know how to fire the gun, I just didn't want...
Pretty sure that it's quite easy to work out.
I assume you stick bullets in and you pull some trigger and take off some kind of safety of some description, but I just didn't necessarily want to be able to easily access it.
Well, I mean, this is the debate that's going on in America at the moment, with they've had several mass shootings.
But then also, would you necessarily declare that you had a mental health issue in certain aspects of your life? Particularly if you're trying to acquire a gun for the purpose of going and doing something bad with it. Yeah. You're not going to go, oh, by the way, I have depression and I'm now going to take this gun and I'm going to shoot people, me etc.
Well, in America, Barack Obama passed a law that says that if you have a recorded medical health issue, and they would do a background check to see that, then you wouldn't be allowed to own a gun. However, the current president is actually thinking of repealing that law.
That's a little scary.
Especially with the
recent events.
Recent events that have been horrific out there. And so, but then saying that, like we've said before, if it's a short-term mental health issue, why can't you own a gun afterwards?
I think maybe it needs to be done more on an individual basis.
Yeah.
Some kind of assessment.
Yeah, and I think, because we're all susceptible to mental health issues.
True, so maybe no one should ever own a gun.
I think that would be the reason. I think that's a good result. I
don't like guns. Personally, even though I have fired one, just to see what it was like, and I fired it at a tree. So it wasn't an animal or anything else.
Yeah, and I can understand why maybe farmers need them and things like that. But
not the general population, just for the hell of it.
Yeah, and if you do want to go to a gun club and shoot guns, I think that's the place to keep them and do it. It isn't have it at my house, take it to the gun club, do some shooting, take it home, give it a nice clean, put it on the wall.
Although he did spend quite a lot of time cleaning his guns.
Is that an euphemism?
It's not a euphemism. It's not a euphemism, but I did at times maybe feel like a bit of a gun widow, a bit like a golf widow.
Anyway, I think maybe we've
diverged. Let's come back.
So I do think it's really interesting that he feels he has to hide the fact that he had a mental health issue so that he can become a psychiatrist, which actually would make him more relatable to people.
I think so. And
he continues to keep it hidden after the story as well.
Yes, but he does then allow himself to live because he was hiding it from himself and from other people.
Yeah.
And he had it in his head that because he had changed his identity and he wasn't being truthful, that he couldn't share his life with another person.
Yeah. But he's able to, and he's able to tell them the secret, and they trust them to keep the secret and then go on the way that he has been, which is really nice. And it is like the little happy ending, walk off into the sunset part of the book.
Skipping hand in hand.
Yeah. So I think that is a really interesting part. Other than that, I think the only other thing I'd like to discuss about the book is Dr. Gail Thomas, who has taken this post, because she is so disheartened with her residency training at a mental health institute that is also owned by the same company but in a different hospital. And I think the one thing I wanted to discuss about it is that I don't know what mental health treatment is like.
I've not been an inpatient.
No.
I've been an outpatient. I've been to hospitals in crisis where they could have admitted me into hospital. However, because this is probably, again, a sad part, because I seemed like I wasn't necessarily going to hurt myself at that point, they let me go.
Yeah.
And the messages that sent. But that, I think, is a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
In this instance, it's the fact that the horrific ways that these teenagers were treated, because it was another teenager establishment, wasn't it? It was a place for teenagers to come and be treated, but just the things that they were being subjected to.
Yeah, and she felt it was very much, again, like drug them and get them to a sort of catonic state and then deal with it.
Yeah, and they weren't allowed to talk really properly with the patients, were they? I think she describes that they were highly medicated. They were discouraged from having discussions with patients. They were not allowed in each other's rooms. They were pretty much segregated from each other. So all of the things that, when you think about treating mental health, you would go, hang on a minute, that is complete opposite to what should be happening.
No group therapy, no art therapy, no therapy.
It's drugs.
And how that isn't the answer to everything. And I'm not saying you don't need the drugs, because actually
I'm on drugs.
A lot of mental health
good drugs
is about using the drugs to maintain the chemicals in the brain to enable somebody to then be able to deal with the issues that are going on. And so it's not that we're against drugs at all. What we're saying,
no, because I take them,
is that we don't think they should just be the only treatment.
Yeah, and is it that the medical profession jump too quickly to drugs because it is a cheaper alternative to therapy? Don't get me wrong.
I don't think it's just cheaper. I think it's also time. They don't have the time.
Both, I think. I don't think there's necessarily the level of staff or trained staff that are needed to support everyone that comes forward and says, I have a mental health issue, I need help. Which I also think then adds to the stigma, because if you come forward and you go, hang on a minute, I need some help, and they go, oh yeah, here, have this telephone number. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the telephone services are bad. I'm saying that for most people with mental health, they may need longer term support.
Well, most programs are, 6 to 9 week sessions?
Mainly.
And then...
unless you are going through something like dialectical behaviour therapy.
Yeah. But, when you go to your GP and you say, I'm really sorry,
and you're meant
here's
to
your
be
block,
fixed after that.
And, they can request a few more, but only for serious cases. Otherwise, you've got to be fixed in those 6 to 9 appointments, and then off you go. And the first appointment, you're literally
telling them what the problems are and your life history, really. And there's no therapy in your first session.
No.
And I don't know, it takes a while to get into it as well as the person being treated. So,
well, I know for me, I mean, I've been seeing my psychologist for just over a year now.
And we've gone private.
Yeah.
Just putting that out there.
I wouldn't have qualified on the NHS at all. When I told them I was feeling down, again, they gave me medication and left it at that. I sought out a counsellor that a friend of mine was also using and felt they were good. And I've really worked hard with them, and we've managed to get through quite a lot. But that's in a year of seeing them at first weekly and now fortnightly. I see her, and we've only just got to the point where we've dealt with sort of like the fires that needed putting out. So we can now start dealing with the underlying sort of deeper issues that are going on.
In comparison, for me, I've been seeing my psychologist for nearly 2 years now, I think, and I see her on a weekly basis, and we spend an hour, and I do schema therapy. And to be honest, we're still fighting fires now.
Yeah.
And I've been through dialectical behaviour therapy. That took a whole year to get through in itself. But I didn't necessarily feel that I had dealt with the underlying causes, because with dialectical behaviour therapy, what happens really is you learn skills that help you deal with day-to-day life. But it's not necessarily helping me understand where these feelings and thoughts have come from.
Where the schema therapy goes more in detail
Exactly.
with it.
So you look at different ways, and everyone has schemas, and we talked about the critical side, particularly with Janina, and for me, that is very much a problem, and that's the defectiveness schema, and I'm still dealing with that now.
Yeah.
And I still am I'm having arguments and problems with my husband now, but I'm now starting to recognise where and what has triggered it, and then I'm able to explain it to him later.
Yeah.
Whereas before, my behaviour would have been destructive and outrageous.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, this might sound really silly, but I have a real issue with washing up.
Nothing silly. Washing up sucks.
I was made to do it a lot as a child, and I felt every time I stand by the sink, I felt isolated and sad and really bad. But I was recently I was able to recognise that came from my childhood and where it came from. But I'm still working on making myself feel that actually it's okay if I leave the washing up. It's my washing up. I live alone. It doesn't matter. And that when I want to do it, it's okay. And when I'm standing there doing it, I'm not in my childhood home anymore. I'm not a child anymore. And so I don't have to have those feelings. I'm choosing and trying to bring it back to me rather than trying to feel those childhood feelings. And that's still me trying to do that, a year later. So I do think we've come to the end of discussing this book. Like we have said, there's a lot of other characters in there for you to explore on your own reading the book. And I do really recommend it. I really enjoyed reading this book.
I did as well. And I found certain things fascinating, particularly the research angle, because I've done research in the past. And just another shout out to the University of Hertfordshire, who are doing some research. So if you can help them out, please listen to the beginning of this podcast and contact Becca. Just getting it out there again. But yeah, no, I think this is definitely one to read. So far, I don't think we've necessarily read one that we've gone, oh, don't bother with it. I don't think it necessarily shows mental health in a great light. But
it's very insightful.
Yeah.
And I think that it does give you an impression of maybe different ways of treating what teenagers might be feeling and how actually our society might be causing mental health by pushing down some of our brightest stars. Our education system is not set up to, encourage creativity, unfortunately, at the moment, which is very sad.
It is.
Okay, I think we are done. So
until next time, thanks for listening.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you feel that you need additional support with your mental health, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Next week will be a deep dive on acute stress disorder. Our next book will be Am I Normal Yet? By Holly Bourne. To find out more, please visit our website, mentalhealthbookclub.com. We would really love to hear what you think about this podcast. Please get in touch with us at our Facebook page, which is the Mental Health Book Club, or at our Twitter, which is at MHBC_podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.